DC has a habit of handing off its biggest legacies faster than you'd expect, and sometimes far too easily. One new successor, one editorial shift, and iconic heroes are suddenly pushed to the sidelines while someone else takes the mantle. These replacements aren't always permanent, but the transition can feel abrupt, almost effortless. Characters with years of history and fan loyalty temporarily reduced to background roles in their own legacy. So, how did these switches happen so quickly, and why did they feel so easy? Here are 10 classic DC Comics characters who were replaced too easily. At number 10 is Kara Zor-El, or Supergirl. Kara Zor-El debuted in 1959's Action Comics issue 252 as Superman's biological cousin, becoming a massive piece of Kryptonian lore. Throughout the Silver and Bronze Ages, she was a mainstay who anchored titles like Adventure Comics and her own solo series. However, her legacy was casually tossed aside. Kara died a hero's death in 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, making the ultimate sacrifice, only to be completely erased from DC history to enforce an editorial mandate making Superman the sole survivor of Krypton. 3 years later, DC realized they needed the trademark, introducing Matrix in Superman issue 16. Matrix was a protoplasmic, shape-shifting synthetic life form created in a pocket universe. This swap felt like a massive insult to fans because it erased decades of Kara's history, replacing a beloved blood relative with a synthetic blob who merely mimicked her appearance. The original Kara was wiped from everyone's memories and remained canonically erased for 20 years. Fortunately, Kara was reintroduced in 2004 to reclaim her legacy. Today, she is more prominent than ever, set to headline the highly anticipated Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow movie in James Gunn's new DCU, while her bizarre Matrix replacement has been completely forgotten. At number 9 is Guy Gardner. Guy Gardner first appeared in Green Lantern issue 59 in 1968, established as the Ring's official alternate choice to Hal Jordan. He was the undisputed secondary Green Lantern of Earth, a key piece of Silver Age mythology waiting in the wings. This changed abruptly when John Stewart, an unemployed architect, was chosen by the Guardians in Green Lantern issue 87 in 1971. Guy was suddenly hit by a bus while trying to save a civilian during an earthquake. While he was in a coma, the Guardians instantly instructed Hal to recruit John. This felt like a cheap gimmick because Guy didn't go down in a blaze of cosmic glory. He was sidelined by a random traffic accident purely so the writer could quickly introduce a more socially relevant character. Guy was left in a coma for years, suffering brain damage and torture before waking up highly aggressive. Today, both characters are definitive DC icons with massive live-action futures ahead of them. John is set to co-star in the upcoming HBO Lantern series, while Guy is bringing his trademark anger to the big screen in the new Superman movie. At number 8 is Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson debuted in 1940 and served as the definitive Silver Age sidekick before transitioning into a highly capable Bronze Age leader. He was the cornerstone of the Batman family and led the massively popular New Teen Titans in the early 1980s. However, Batman abruptly demanded Dick quit being Robin after he was shot by the Joker. Almost immediately, Bruce adopted Jason Todd, introduced in 1983's Batman issue 357. Jason was an orphaned acrobat with the exact same origin story as Dick, making his first appearance in the Robin costume in Batman issue 366. This handover felt incredibly forced and rushed. Batman essentially fired his surrogate son only to replace him with an exact replica. DC refused to let the Robin mantle rest, making it feel like an editorial copy-paste job rather than natural evolution. Dick successfully transitioned into Nightwing, but was exiled from the main Batman comics for years. Today, Dick is universally beloved, while this specific pre-crisis copycat version of Jason was erased, paving the way for the vastly different Red Hood we know today. And that's where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore, because the next group didn't just lose their spot, their replacements challenged the very fabric of the DC multiverse. At number 7 is Kent Nelson, or Dr. Fate. Kent Nelson first appeared in More Fun Comics number 55 in 1940, serving as a Golden Age pillar and a founder of the Justice Society of America. For decades, he was the definitive, omnipotent magical powerhouse of the DC Universe. However, this legacy was quickly destroyed when Jared Stevens, a Tomb Raider and mercenary, was introduced in Fate number 1 in 1994. The transition happened fast and brutally following the 0 Hour event, where Kent and his wife Inza rapidly aged and died. Jared immediately looted their artifacts. This change lacked any real emotional weight because it was just a textbook 1990s edgy design trend forced onto a classic mythos. Jared mystically reconfigured the iconic Helmet of Fate into a dagger and began using guns, which completely alienated fans who wanted mysticism. Kent was dead, and his legacy was literally destroyed. Because the gimmick failed spectacularly, Jared Stevens was killed off in 1999, and the classic Dr. Fate mantle was quickly restored. At number 6 is Arthur Curry or Aquaman. Arthur Curry debuted in 1941's More Fun Comics number 73, cementing his status as the undisputed king of Atlantis. He was a founding Justice League member and the vital anchor for the entire oceanic corner of the DC universe. However, this iconic legacy was disrupted when Arthur Joseph Curry, a genetically mutated human with the exact same name, was introduced in 2006's Aquaman, Sword of Atlantis number 40. The transition happened shockingly fast. During the Infinite Crisis event, the original Aquaman mysteriously mutated into a bizarre squid-faced monster. The new Arthur simply took his place in the very next issue. This decision felt completely baffling and unnecessary. Killing off the original hero by turning him into a nameless monster just to introduce a cheap duplicate replacement with a slightly different origin felt deeply unnecessary. The original Aquaman was unceremoniously assassinated while trapped in his monster form. Unsurprisingly, this forced replacement was universally rejected by loyal fans, forcing DC to resurrect him. At number 5 is Wally West or The Flash. Wally debuted in 1959's The Flash issue 110 as Kid Flash, but after the legendary crisis on Infinite Earths, he did the impossible. He successfully took over his fallen mentor and uncle's mantle. For over 20 years, Wally was the definitive Flash. He introduced the Speed Force, starred in one of DC's most acclaimed solo series, and earned the absolute loyalty of an entire generation of readers. However, this legendary run was dismantled in 2 brutal phases. First, DC resurrected Barry Allen in 2008's Final Crisis and quickly repositioned him as the primary Flash, demoting Wally to the background. Then, when the New 52 launched in 2011, DC went even further, completely erasing Wally from existence. While later lore would reveal Dr. Manhattan manipulated the timeline to steal this history, in the real world, it felt like a massive slap in the face. Wally wasn't just sidelined, it was as if his 23-year run had never happened just to make room for a younger, rebooted universe. The fan outrage was completely justified, eventually forcing DC to bring the original Wally back during the DC Rebirth era. At number 4 is Tim Drake or Robin. Tim Drake first appeared in Batman issue 436 in 1989. He earned his place through raw intellect, becoming the definitive Robin of the 90s and 2000s while starring in a massive solo comic book series. However, his tenure ended abruptly when Damian Wayne, Bruce Wayne's biological son, claimed the mantle in Batman and Robin issue 1. The replacement happened remarkably fast following Bruce Wayne's apparent death. Dick Grayson took over as Batman and immediately fired Tim, handing the Robin mantle to Damian with zero transition. This shift felt like a massive slap in the face, because Tim didn't outgrow the role. He was forcibly evicted from it by his own adopted brother. It made fans feel like Tim's 2 decades of loyalty were disrespected. Tim was pushed into the new, isolated identity of Red Robin, largely separated from the core Batman family dynamic. While both characters have massive fan bases today, Damian remains the primary Robin, while Tim frequently struggles to find a consistent identity. But now, we're getting into the most shocking cases, where these heroes weren't just temporarily sidelined, their entire legacies were hijacked in ways that absolutely enraged the fanbase. At number 3 is Selina Kyle or Catwoman. Selina Kyle first appeared in Batman issue 1 in 1940, establishing herself as the iconic anti-hero and Batman's greatest foil. She reached new critical heights during Ed Brubaker's 2000s run, acting as the undisputed protector of Gotham's East End. However, her legendary status was interrupted when her longtime friend and sidekick, Holly Robinson, replaced her. The transition happened shockingly fast in Catwoman issue 53 in 2006. Following a sudden one-year time jump, readers discovered Selina had a baby, quit being Catwoman, and handed the suit to Holly off-panel. This handoff felt completely hollow. Selina was abruptly sidelined by a sudden pregnancy plotline, and Holly, who lacked the physical skills or commanding presence, was thrust into a demanding role she was not ready for. Selina stayed home under an alias, while Holly immediately got framed for murder and arrested. Ultimately, this unpopular gimmick was abandoned within a single year. Selina took the suit back as Holly quietly faded away. At number 2 is Ted Knight, or Starman. Ted Knight first appeared in Adventure Comics issue 61 in 1941, establishing himself as the Golden Age Starman. He was a foundational member of the Justice Society of America and a vital cornerstone of 1940s DC continuity. However, this legacy was abruptly abandoned when Will Payton, a magazine copy editor struck by an energy beam, was introduced in 1988's Starman issue 1. The transition happened instantly. Ted Knight was suddenly written out as retired, and DC simply launched a new comic book with a new guy using the exact same name. This jarring transition felt like a cynical corporate pivot because Will Payton had absolutely zero connection to Ted Knight, the iconic cosmic rod, or the historical legacy. Ted was sidelined completely while Will operated with a totally different power set. DC Comics eventually realized the massive disconnect and later created Ted's son Jack Knight. At number 1 is Billy Batson, or Captain Marvel. Billy Batson first appeared in Whiz Comics issue 2, published in late 1939. Establishing himself as the iconic child-turned-superhero now widely known to modern audiences as Shazam. He was a classic powerhouse rivaling Superman, serving as the core of the beloved Marvel family. However, his legendary run was interrupted when Freddie Freeman, known as Captain Marvel Jr., was pushed into the main role in the 2006 comic The Trials of Shazam. The transition happened incredibly fast. The wizard Shazam was suddenly killed, and Billy was immediately forced to become the new white-bearded wizard. This left his superhero role empty for Freddie to fill. This editorial mandate robbed fans of the magic because it stripped Billy of his core appeal, a kid turning into a hero, and forced him into an old man's role. Freddie's grim struggle to claim the power felt disconnected from the joy of the original mythos. Billy sat on a rock in the Rock of Eternity, acting as a grumpy exposition character. The new 52 reboot erased this history. Legacies shift, but originals still matter. Comment your favorite classic, subscribe now, and stay tuned for more DC Deep Dives.